The GB News Tavern has been declared open. It is Talking Pints. I'm joined by Lieutenant General Jonathon, retired British Army officer, who was Deputy Commander of the NATO-led International Security Assistance Force in Afghanistan, and these days a military historian and many other things. Jonathon, welcome.
Thank you very much, Nigel. Lovely to be here.
Very good to have you here. Now, just looking at your army career. So we've got 6 tours of Northern Ireland, 5 tours of the Balkans and all those different problems that we had there in the 90s, 2 operations in Iraq, 1 in Afghanistan, 1 in Sierra Leone. They're the sort of wartime active ones, plus, you know, a list as long as your arm of peacetime ones. And you've got the DSO and various other. How many medals have you got?
About 18.
I mean,
it's rude.
Do you have to have a sort of special sort of extra suit to wear?
No, it's just a lot of bad luck, Nigel. It's wrong place, wrong time, usually wrong order of dress.
It's interesting. You watch Remembrance Day parades now, and a lot of younger soldiers do have a lot of medals now, because we've been a very active army.
Well, they did have, until about 8 or 9 years ago.
Yeah.
But we're now back to where we were in the Cold War, where there were a few operations going on. And anyone below major or colour sergeant has probably only got 1 or 2.
OK. So how many years in the army?
40 altogether.
And the worst bits?
Oh, the worst bits. A few times in Northern Ireland, people have forgotten just how awful Northern Ireland was. You know, over 700 soldiers we lost, far more than all the other campaigns put together. Siege of Gorazda in the Balkans, probably the worst. And boy, do I feel for people like those in Mariupol, because I know what a siege is like. You know, it's scary some of the time, it's boring a lot of the time, but there is this constant feeling of isolation, of uncertainty, of threat, and it generates an atmosphere that you can touch, and it's very, very wearing.
Yeah, I'm going to come back to Mariupol, because so many news stories around Mariupol, I've been trying over the last few days to work out what the truth of it is, and we will come back to that.
Okay.
Yeah, obviously some very tough situations that you were in, but you wouldn't have stayed in it 40 years unless you enjoyed it.
I joined to do that stuff. I didn't join to do tribal dancing on some parade ground in London. I joined to get out there and do it. And when you do it, if you're half decent at it, then you self-select for the next appointment. And that becomes your way of life. You know, I never served in the Ministry of Defence or in the Permanent Joint Headquarters or in Land Forces Command. I always served in field formations, except when I was in defence education.
You joined an army that, Northern Ireland apart, had been relatively quiet in terms of overseas engagements, then got very, very busy, and we've become a little bit quieter again. But you were also part of an army that, in terms of manpower and in terms of many resources, you saw being cut and cut and cut again. And I've spoken to people from all 3 services who say it's been quite tough and quite demoralising at times, realising that somehow you're not really valued by government in the way that you used to be.
Well, it's not just being.
Is that unfair?
No, I don't think it's unfair at all. It's not just being cut. We were being cut even before the Tory government and the coalition came in. Blair just said, "Well, thanks very much for doing what you did. Do it again, but do it with less." And we did, because we knew what we were doing. But we've gone from being a big army that knew how to do big army stuff, move large quantities of materiel, people, obstacle crossings, logistics, and we've shrunk to the point where practicing and doing that sort of thing in reality has gone away. And it's not. You don't want to be launching an operation unless you've prepared for it. And I think you're seeing some of this with the Russians at the tactical level. They're not very good, it seems, at stitching the combined arms battle together. That's probably because, like us, they haven't practiced it.
And we sort of cut the army, and yet the Territorial Army, or now Army Reserve as it's now known, that was asked to do more and more and more.
But it's tiny, Nigel. I mean, when I first joined, the Territorial Army was getting on for 80,000 people, nearly as big as the regular army is now. And it had been grown, having been cut back to about 20,000. but it had taken 10 years to get it there. But it was a very capable force for certain specific things. And it did a lot of the rear security during the Cold War. And in the wake of that, I had a couple of territorial army units under command in Iraq, where they were very good for limited tasks. But now there's just over 20,000 of them.
Yeah.
And the footprint's gone. You can only have a big territorial army if you have a wide footprint. You have lots of TA centres. People won't travel 30 miles after work for a couple of...
And this goes, I mean, we're not just talking Army here. We're talking about the Navy, we're talking about the Air Force, we're talking about all of our services. Now, what we have seen, and I've looked on, as Westminster has just thought defence doesn't matter. I've looked on at this. Now, Germany have performed the most spectacular U-turn. And I suppose, like all things in politics, they say it, will they actually do it? I sense they actually will do it. I sense the Germans are about to reverse that policy, are about to have quite a big build-up. They've bought into the mantra that, peace comes through strength and not through weak. And I certainly believe in that. I'm sure you do too. And yet we're getting rumours that in this statement straight budget on Wednesday, that Sunak is not going to contemplate increased defence spending. How do you feel about that?
Well, I think it's madness. Putin has shown his hand. It would be very unwise to think that Ukraine will be the end of his ambitions. Nuclear weapons won't deter him because they're not usable unless there's a direct threat to our own territory. So how else do you deter him but by conventional strength? And deterrence in the Cold War worked because we had credible and capable nuclear deterrence, and we had credible and capable conventional forces. And we've got to get on with it. We've got to get on with it fast and do so under the umbrella of NATO.
So we need to rebuild. Is this the argument that we need to increase? I mean, because they say we're spending 2% just over.
Yes, but are we? That figure includes things that back in the Cold War weren't there. It includes the nuclear deterrent. It includes service pensions. And a figure is meaningless unless it's tied to capabilities, because you could spend 2% of your GDP on defence and the whole lot could go on grass cutting and painting furniture and stuff.
Yeah.
Unless you say, right, we're going to spend 2% and we're going to zone in on air defence, on maritime security, and we do need to look at maritime air as probably, and I say that as an army officer, it's probably the most important thing. We are going to invest back into heavy armour and things like that, and pin that money to actual capabilities.
Do you have many supporters? Do you think increasing military spending at this, even given where we are now, do you think it has many friends in Parliament?
I think it's probably got more than it did 3 weeks ago, don't you?
No, I do. I do. But it's been so low down.
Yeah, but
the list of priorities of political parties.
Armed forces are an essential attribute of statehood, as Professor Michael Howard rightly and famously said. They're one of the ways in which other nations define you, and they determine how they deal with you. And if you're militarily capable, people will respect you, and they will deal with you properly. If you're incapable, then they won't. And you can see Putin's behaviour. Looks at NATO, apart from the USA, and thinks...
Well, NATO, I mean, of course, Afghanistan was a NATO mission. Joe Biden pulled the plug on it. We all wanted it to end, of course. It was a question of how it was to end, but the unilateral withdrawal without consulting NATO allies, I mean, quite a serious moment and a big rethink going on, certainly in my mind, about whether the Americans are now going to be reliable under Joe Biden or not. Biden finally coming to Europe this week, and I think he should have come 3 weeks ago, personally. But do you still think there is confidence in NATO as an organisation?
Yes, I do. I really do. The American Army, for example, has reactivated the Fifth Corps and deployed the forward headquarters into Poland.
Yes.
They're deploying an awful lot of...
Sorry to interrupt. What size of strength is that?
An Army Corps would be 50,000 plus.
Oh, so it's a serious deployment.
Yeah, there's quite a lot of it still in the USA, but they're bringing more units forward for 9-month tours. I strongly suspect that they'll be permanently basing more, and not in Germany, further forward, Romania, Bulgaria, Poland, the Baltic states. There's a lot of air power being moved which isn't being talked about. But of course, that's the most flexible element of defence. And the Americans bring capabilities that nobody else has. And this is why European armed forces are one of the reasons that it's such a barking mad idea.
Oh, no. President Macron keeps saying that the Ukrainian crisis shows the need for a European defence force.
Is that so?
Yeah. Well, it is so, according to President Macron.
Well, I don't think that a European defence force without American backing would be able to face the Russians for more than about 10 minutes. Doesn't have the numbers, doesn't have the firepower, doesn't have a whole raft of things. And it's really the Americans that are the backbone of NATO, and it's the Americans that Putin most fears.
OK, so you feel that... I mean, Trump, of course, said some pretty harsh things about NATO. He turned up in Brussels and said, look at this great big building. Why have you spent all this money on it? And why?
Fair comment.
And why are you all delinquent and not paying your 2%? I mean, I actually think he was right to say those things.
Yeah, he had a point, because one of the diseases of the post-Cold War NATO has been far too many headquarters and not enough soldiers.
Yes, and it was all to do with the dividend, wasn't it, of the Berlin Wall coming down and everything. So you still feel that the Americans, whatever I think of Joe Biden, forget that. You still feel the Americans are committed to this.
Yeah, because I have the privilege of doing a lot of work with the American military. I served with them for a long time. I know them. The US military knows how to fight. It knows its business. Yeah. And it's a determined, dedicated, capable professional military.
And they respect us enormously.
Yes, I mean, I'm not quite sure how it is that we're repaying that respect at the moment by shrinking in the way we are and dumping so many capabilities. How it is that they still trust us, I'm not sure.
They do. They really do. Jonathon, we've got what's going on. Mariupol, we touched on earlier. A siege. Thousands of people reportedly left Mariupol over the course of the last few days. No electricity, no internet, no mobile phones. They've all run out.
Yes, back to Grazda in the 90s.
And we're told that thousands are being taken against their will as almost political prisoners and taken into Russia. The Russians say, no. Mariupol is overwhelmingly a Russian-speaking area, and they'd rather come for safety in Russia than stay in Ukraine. I mean, look, there's nothing that Putin has done over the last few weeks that is good in any way at all. But when we see all these news reports, I bet there are a lot of people sitting at home now thinking, we see all this stuff. What are we to believe?
Well, there's an old saying in the military, the first report is always wrong. So I'm always intensely sceptical of anything that I hear first off, and anything that is not corroborated by a series of other evidence, because it's too easy to get suckered by a deception, either misinformation, error, or disinformation, deliberate misleading. And both are going on, and the Ukrainians are doing it, and the Russians are doing it, and I bet the BBC's doing it too.
So be sceptical about everything.
Be highly sceptical about anything.
And we keep hearing all this about the Nazi Azov battalion, and we hear about biolabs and all of these things. And Ukraine is a very corrupt country, and I touched a moment ago on Hunter Biden and his involvement with Burisma, the company, and all the rest of it. And yet, when it really comes down to it, Putin, who I thought was quite a clever operator 10 years ago, seems to have lost the plot completely. I mean, he's invaded Ukraine. The vast majority of Ukrainians in Western Ukraine do not want to be under Russian control. Can you see an ending to this? Is there a peace deal possible?
Well, I agree. I think the whole thing is a massive strategic miscalculation, but he's going to have to pay for that. I think at the moment we've got to make a distinction between what's happening at the tactical level, where the Russians are often not doing terribly well, and what's happening at the level of the campaign. And it looks to me as if the Russians are sitting on most of what they see as the bargaining chips for the negotiations. It's now all about the negotiations. And a deal is there on the table, we know.
Yeah. And Putin's agreed to meet Zelensky, we believe.
Yeah, so has already a deal been done with Zelensky? It's possible. But if they do strike a deal, will Ukrainians who think they fought the Russians to a standstill and have become very much awakened to their national pride, are they going to swallow the loss of the Crimea and the Donbass and a corridor through Mariupol.
If peace is going to come, they're going to have to accept some losses.
They're going to have to compromise. And the trouble is that the compromise often leaves you being compromised. And there are some things that they won't be able to give up on. They need to keep Odessa.
Yeah.
And
Yes.
Russian fleet
of course.
sitting there.
Yes. Yes.
They need to keep Kiev.
Yes.
But they're going to lose an awful lot of their industry and their natural resources as well.
It's very difficult.
Agriculture.
Very difficult. Jonathan, we could talk for a long, long time. We unfortunately don't get the privilege of doing that, although Talking Pints is longer than most segments. Thank you very much indeed. And thank you for the service you've given the country.
Well, thank you
much
very much.
appreciated.
Pleasure.
Thank you.